Yeah.
So I'll introduce this one. Do you prefer to go by your actual name or SWYN?
I do both. So it's whatever you feel comfortable, Swyx or Sean.
I would usually say Sean Wang, popularly known as Swyx on the internet. Kind of get
Is that
both
how
of
you
them in
actually
there.
say it?
Yeah, there is no other way. People always are unsure, but then there's no other way.
I know, right? It's like to me, it's always been a fairly intuitive pronunciation. It's like Swyx, like Swix. Duh. Like you said, how else would you pronounce it? I guess Swyx. I bet some people will probably try that one.
I just thought it was like some letters that you just say. I don't know. Okay. Welcome back to FSJam. I forgot what episode number is. Is it 10, 11?
It's gonna be pretty fluid. It's not gonna be because we still got a couple to air. It's gonna be like 15 or something.
So, welcome back to FSJam. Today we got a really exciting guest, Sean Wang, also known as Swyx on Twitter. He's a developer advocate. Is it developer experience? Developer experience. He is a developer experience. He is a
developer advocate who works on developer experience. Probably how I would describe it.
Yeah, I hate terms. He's a developer advocate that works on developer experience at AWS Amplify. So let's get to it. Welcome, Sean.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I can fill out more intro if you need to, or we can just get right to the topics, however you want.
Yeah, no, I'd love to get kind of like how you describe yourself, because as we're saying here, these terms are a little bit fluid. I struggle to define exactly what I do as well, but I think you and I are kind of swimming in the same boat in terms of the work we do. So I'd really love to hear like how you describe your work.
Sure, I like to describe it as working on developer experience in general, and then the two things that kind of fall out of that are developer tools and developer communities. So most recently I was at Netlify, and my job title was literally developer experience engineer. I mean, I do a lot of sort of open source advocacy research. I don't maintain any big popular open source tools, but I'm basically friends with all of them. I do a lot of writing about them, teaching on egghead.io, as well as on my own personal blog. And then, a fair amount of community work. I helped to moderate the r/React.js subreddit, helping it to grow to over 200,000 members. And then I left and I started the Svelte Society meetup. And that's a growing community now. And then I'm also managing my own book community because I wrote a book last year, and that's still pretty wild to say as a self-published author.
Part of that community on Circle, right?
It's a paid community for people talking about the non-technical aspects of technical careers, and that's been doing pretty well as well. So I think the summation of it is that I think developer experience is a holistic approach in terms of like the tooling as well as the people. So I'm pretty interested in both sides.
Yeah, I usually think of it in terms of two poles, but you're actually helping me think of it more as like a three-pole kind of thing. I usually think of it as community being one end and then like content creation being kind of the other end, whereas it looks like you're thinking of like community on one end and like kind of tools on one end. And for you, I guess content creation is kind of like an overarching barrier, overarching, for all of it.
I just kind of, my approach is to just try to treat it as a side effect of everything that I do. So it works better if you don't treat it like a job. You just treat it as like a thing that you do normally anyway. It's kind of like breathing. You don't think about breathing as like a separate job. You just breathe.
Yeah, and you are known for learn in public is kind of your like catchphrase that you've really spent a lot of time kind of getting out there and explaining and kind of like saying like, what is this? And I'm someone I used to be a teacher, and like as a teacher, the kind of feedback loop between teaching and like learning yourself is like it's baked in. Like you can't teach without learning. So like when I first kind of heard you talking about this, like, oh, so you're saying you're a teacher.
I would never say I'm a teacher. I just write my notes, the notes that I wish I would had, and sometimes it's useful just for myself, and sometimes it's useful to others. The assertion is that you do a much better job of it. You learn a lot faster and you grow your network a lot faster if you do it in public, whereas the default that we've been taught in schools is to do everything in private, because schools have a very zero-sum view of the world. And the reality is that the world is very positive sum if you treat it that way.
Very cool. Yeah, no, it's one of those things I find that people have a hard time wrapping their mind around, like what teaching actually is, which is why I feel like there's a huge disconnect between, like you say, what you do and what is considered teaching, because our school system has warped people's minds about what they think teaching is. And it's unfortunate,
Well,
but yeah, you and I are very much in the same boat there in
so
terms of how we view these things.
I don't call it teaching because I think when you're a teacher, you have responsibility for the student to learn something. Whereas and that necessarily means sometimes you slow yourself down for this to match the pace of the student. Whereas I don't really care about that. You're either with me or you're not, and it's fine if you're not, because there's someone else who's going to be more your speed. I'm just going to do my best, and those people who sort of vibrate at the same frequency as I do can follow along, and the rest, it's not a fit. And I'm not going to change who I am just to go cater to a particular student audience. I mean, I can do if I want to, right? I just don't think that is the best use of time sometimes.
So the whole concept that I sometimes question with learning to public is, what was your experiences before you started learning in public? And was it, institutionalized? So you've already walked out with a computer science degree and now you're learning in public, or you're starting from nothing and you're learning in public?
Sure. So first of all, I don't have a CS degree. I went through boot camp. And my previous career was in finance. I worked in investment banking and hedge funds. And some of the best work of my life I did in those hedge funds and banks. And I'll never see that again, because I wrote it. I wrote my research reports and my investment theses. And my boss was like super impressed with them. He like sent me really, really warm, like congratulatory messages about like some of the really good stuff that I did. Now it's gone. I will never have it again. No one ever saw it. It just sat in my boss's mailbox, and then we both moved on to different companies, and now it's just gone forever. And so that's a really deep experience that really cut to my core, because that's 5-6 years of my life I'll never see again, and I don't want to live like that. So I think that's a fundamental desire just for me to live life in higher resolution than like this is just a job, and whatever I do is property of my employer. I think tech is a fundamentally more open industry than finance, and so I'm embracing that as much as confidentiality and all that will let me do it. And so definitely open source, and this whole movement of building in the open and learning in public is really helpful. But I didn't really get this religion, if you can call it that, until I graduated from my boot camp. And I was in my first software engineering job post boot camp, and I was very underused. So I actually just started like blogging and speaking at a meetup, just to learn stuff, because I was not learning at work. And that actually became a bigger source of learning than my workplace. And then I realized that like this is the kind of teaching that I can create for myself, and the opportunities that I could create for myself, if I did this in public. Like when you limit yourself to just the current employer that you work at, then it's really like a roll of the dice, because some of them, I did not have a good mentor, and I would have been stuck with this guy if I didn't put in the effort to find mentors outside of work. And so it started working for me, and then I just kept at it. And now I'm about like 3 or 4 years in. The majority of the job offers that I get are all through, my relationships. It's a fundamentally different thing to have someone sit down and interview you and say, oh, this is just a formality because I Googled you and you're the kind of person we're looking for. And that's because there's nothing left to prove. Like if you learn in public, you go so much more higher definition than just the CV, because the CV is a very lossy, or I don't know if you call it resume or CV. It's a very lossy compression algorithm, right? Like if you think about compress years of my life into this one page and hope that the other side has the same key to unlock it and decompress it to see if it's a match. It's such a ridiculous game. I mean, and not just, let's not talk about the CV, and let's not talk about the resume, talk about the interview as well. Like let's set up some artificial 30 to 45 minute scenario where you can show us your coding skills. Why not do more than that? And why not, basically show this body of work that can really give the full impression of like what you can and cannot do. So I really like, the more I explore this idea, the more I fell in love with it. And I think I would not push it so hard if I didn't truly believe that people would benefit from it. This is, it's not my idea. I got it from Kelsey Hightower, who's sort of Mr. Kubernetes, and I'm sure he got it from somewhere else. The earliest mention I can find of this goes back to NASA, which uses learning in public as a form of knowledge transfer within the organization. So yeah, it's an idea with a very strong intellectual history, and there are a bunch of reasons why it works. And I think developers would be well served to do it. And I'm not saying to put yourself out in public 100% of your time and to live tweet every single thought going through your head. Nobody wants that. But the default is 0, and you probably want to go from 0 to 5 or 10% public. And that will open you up to a lot more luck and learning and networking than you had before. And I think that's the whole thesis.
Full Stack Academy, right? That was your boot camp?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I had heard of Full Stack Academy because they actually put out a lot of really fantastic short YouTube videos of people giving presentations there. And so it seemed to me like they were kind of more focused in actually teaching their students like what advocacy is. Did you do any of that when you were in Full Stack Academy, or was this stuff that you totally got after your boot camp?
I mostly got it after. The videos are kind of a portfolio piece, but they're not done with the purpose of doing advocacy. It's just like, a way to present your work.
Yeah, it's just a nice kind of side effect of that, I guess, is that can kind of push you more the advocacy direction. Yeah. There
is a video of me. It's not very good, but there is a video of me presenting my projects somewhere. But no, it's a great bootcamp. The thing that I got from them is to focus on systems over goals, which is this idea that when you set goals, setting goals alone just doesn't really tell you how to get them. You need to focus on the system anyway. And then once you're focusing on the system so much, you don't really care about the goal, because all you got to do is keep working on the system to be better than you were the day before. And that's all that matters.
Yeah, my music teacher, Stuart, called it process, not product, was the term we used.
Sure. Yeah. Different names for the same thing.
So one of the things that I always think about is that learning and teaching in public is it works both ways. As you said, it shows that you're worth a lot more than just what's on a CV, but then you're also teaching other people how to follow your path. How many times have we came up against a problem and gone, am I the first person to be figuring this out? And then you solve the problem, and then you're just like, okay, carry on with the rest of my life. And you don't actually document it.
Yeah.
And if you then do document it for the next person, is that in private or is that in public? And this is the thing that I have to hold up my hands and say I struggle with, for multiple reasons, because the product I'm building, I believe we're doing a lot of firsts with what we're doing with Redwood. And there's so many things, like a list of things that I'm like, I need to write a post, how to do that. I need to write that. I need to write that. And then I just get lost because I'm so focused on the point and of building. But I understand that's very unique to an entrepreneur developer compared to someone that's, working for a company.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff there. I would say the stuff that you may very, I mean, Redwood is still so new that you may very well be the first person running into this stuff, and it would be very valuable for them. But don't feel the pressure to do it. You do have a day job already, which is trying to build this this company. So I think you limit yourself to do what you can, right? Like, so instead of, I think you should just fundamentally internalize that you're not going to produce at the level of professional content creators, but like 2 to 3 minutes from you on like the core insight, or just like a screen share, right? Like I really like the idea of Loom. Loom is this app that like just lets you record and shares video clips, and it's just like just 5 minutes from you showing the insight, like a good title that people can search, some code snippets that people can copy from. That might save someone hours and days of just like searching around, and they may connect with you and they might work with you in the future. You never know. But if you just kept it to yourself, then it will not happen. That's the one thing that's for sure. So I think if you time box it, so like, okay, I only have 5 minutes, 30 minutes to do this. But let's like put down the most important things I learned in this period, and then just do it. And whatever you end up with, you just have to ship it. You don't give yourself some choice that it has to be like perfect, or like a super well written blog post with like introductory context and like an end conclusion and like whatever. Get rid of all of that. Just go, core insight, done, next, move on. You got
Step
better
one,
things to do.
Here's the first bit of code. Step 2, here's the second bit. Step 3, run it. And
even that may be too much effort, right? Like literally sometimes you just have to go like, I was doing this and then I tried this other thing and it worked. End of story. And sometimes those are the best blog posts because straight to the point. You're not telling me about your day. I don't care as a reader. So yeah.
I think that's really the hardest thing for people getting started in content creation is this idea of it has to be this big thing, and it has to be really involved, and it has to be perfect.
We copy what we see in others, and sometimes that's important. Sometimes the context and the introduction is important. But if you're gonna do this like every day, get rid of it. Only do it when it really matters. In fact, sometimes I see a lot of people do this actually. They'll start out with the stub, with the core, and if people like see a lot of demand for it, then they'll flesh it out over time. A blog post is not like this static thing that you write on that day and you never touch ever. You can start out with the stub and then flesh it out if people want more. But if people don't want more, then why are you investing so much effort up front?
People want a lot more Svelte kit, according to my blog metrics.
It's just a new toy. It's
well, State of JS just came out, and Svelte was on top, to what I remember, to most want to use. I think it was that.
Highest satisfaction, and then there was another one, highest like interest for learning, something like that. I mean, it's doing well. But I mean, I don't particularly like. What's funny is like, I'm invested in Svelte's success. I think React is great too. I'm at a point where like I'm not gonna make money like betting on either. Like as long as I can use either one of them, they're both great. I can make user interfaces with them. Let's talk about other stuff that actually helps me make money as a entrepreneur or a developer.
Yeah, you're in a very interesting position in your job in AWS. I'd like to get into this because this is something that is really passionate for us. This is, of course, the Full Stack Jamstack podcast. And when I look at the kind of areas you're spinning around with AWS, to me, it's very full stack focused, and it's very much in the same kind of ideas of what we're trying to enable here with Redwood. And it's a lot of tools, a large suite of things you're kind of working on. To me, I personally think of as like Amplify as like the big bucket. You may or may not agree with that, but I'd be kind of curious, for my sake at least, to start there and say like, what is Amplify?
Sure. Amplify is like a dedicated team to solve front-end developer-specific issues using AWS. So AWS is an existing bundle of services, something like 200-ish services, solving problems at all sorts of scale for all sorts of customers. The problem is, the saying is that you kind of have to go to 9 months of cloud school to to even get anywhere doing that. And front-end developers, it doesn't really resonate when I talk about like VPCs and IAM policies and stuff like that. It doesn't really resonate with front-end developers, and that's fine. And I think companies like Netlify and Vercel have really paved the way to like the kind of workflow that front-end developers like, which is very, very minimal DevOps essentially, and as much business logic writing as possible, and then you just you push to Git and it deploys. I think and that's a very fundamental concept of Jamstack, and I think that's something that for sure those two startups have really pioneered. The main thing that Amplify does is essentially helps you do that with AWS tools, and so the idea is that if you're a company that already is primarily on AWS and you want to have that kind of developer experience without using like a separate startups cloud or a separate billing process or separate whatever, like identity, like, you already have an existing database that you want to plug into at AWS, or you already have an existing identity system with all your customers already on it. Like, you don't want to replicate that to some other random system just to have a different developer experience. So Amplify basically is there to sort of flatten out smooth out the sort of developer experience for front-end developers. So even right down to the point of abstracting away the AWS specific naming. So instead of saying like, oh, I want to add Amazon Cognito to my service, you just say amplify add auth, and that's the CLI command that you type for adding authentication to your app. Or I want storage. Okay, amplify add storage, and you don't really have to know about S3, even though that's eventually what you're going to get. And there's a full set of services that are available, and I think that's something I really like about Amplify, which is that they really just go all out because AWS has so many great services. It's kind of like the best of the best. They pick, they curate the services for you. So like there's a solution for analytics, there's a solution for GraphQL gateway, there's a solution for NoSQL database as well as SQL databases, and it's all on the same platform. It's got the same cost control measures, it's got the same sort of environment and region deployment settings, and these are all proven at scale at AWS's scale. So I really like this alternative that is available, and I think probably we could do more with Redwood, because the question with
I know I've talked
Redwood,
to Natter a couple times about it.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, like, the problem with working on such a broad platform is that you never really know what to collaborate on, because like apart from Redwood, there's like the Vue ecosystem, there's like the Angular ecosystem, like they all have legitimate claims to just, and for us, like, as long as we identify, like, here's where you put your build artifacts, here's where you put in all the UI specific components that we offer, that's about it. Like, if you know JavaScript, then all the other things that you can provide, and it's kind of up to you with your specific meta framework or whatever to plug into that hosting platform. So I'm not too concerned about it, but I mean, it'd be nice. Like the thing about Redwood that always stuck with me, right? Like, even when I was at Netlify and I wrote that, the world's first blog post on Redwood, was that, you're like following along the tutorial and you're like deploying to Netlify and all that. That's great. And then you need a database. And then they're like, yeah, go to DigitalOcean and spin up something. And I'm like, just that's not what I want. Right. So I ideally Redwood would have a host that can one place to handle everything. I think that would be a nice ideal. I know Tom Preston Werner has mentioned stuff about this before, but it seems like Netlify hasn't gone that way yet.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and like you hit on so many great things in there, explaining like what Amplify is. It's, to me, is a lot like explaining like what Redwood is, because it's hard. Like it's a lot of things, and it's doing a lot of things for you potentially, but at the same time it can't do everything. So you have to know what it does for you and what it doesn't do for you, and what options you can have with it, and how you can finagle it around with other tools and things. I'm happy to hear that you're interested in getting more integration there, because I agree. I think it's at this point where there still needs to be some more things kind of ironed out in Redwood in terms of like how the auth fits in and how to get it to work with NoSQL. That stuff is going to be a little complicated, but there's definitely a lot of potential there in terms of how they could interop.
Yeah, Amplify is NoSQL by default. So, but we do have an integration with Aurora SQL. So that's an option. Yeah, I mean, yeah, Amplify is also like super full stack. Like, even it's hard for me to even identify what it doesn't do, because we just launched containers hosting, so you can run like Rails on Amplify. Then there's like there's like really no limit. So I mean, that's decidedly not Jamstack, but it's like really stretching this idea of what serverless even is, because the deployment paradigm really is the same as a serverless function. It's just that instead of deploying a simple Lambda function, you're actually deploying a container, and that's wild. But yeah, I mean, it's Amplify is really stretching it based on the existing capabilities of AWS, and I really like that idea. And honestly, to me, I'm also just like trying to learn what, like, I think every developer you can't go your whole career without knowing at least some AWS. So I think this is a really great job to do that with.
I have an interesting opinion about AWS that
Yeah,
it's not bad, it's not good. It's just, it's just too complex. And when I started, so I've gone through 3 iterations to find what we're building now. And the first iteration was all built on AWS like 3 years ago now. So I don't even think Amplify was a thing then. And like it was built with Cognito, EM2s, like S, and I can't even remember all the acronyms now for all the things. But you just got lost with all the connections.
It's a lot of jargon.
To the point that we moved off of AWS, but AWS still charges us like 40p a month for something that I can't work out where. It's like, but it's this thing that what I'm really interested in knowing about Amplify and where it is and where it sits is it almost a second layer provider on the first layer? So like Netlify obviously runs on Amazon.
Yep.
But that second layer, they've abstracted a lot of the functionality, so you never have to worry about it. And that gives a lot of peace of mind to myself personally, as like, I don't mind that you run on AWS. I know I never have to worry about AWS. So it's this thing of, is Amplify the same, almost like a mask for AWS, or is it just AWS, if that makes sense?
I got you. It's the latter. Yeah, I've actually done this blog about second layer clouds. I call them cloud distros, distributions of clouds, and so I pasted the blog post in the chat. But Amplify is not that. So it's basically scaffolds out CloudFormation for you, which is the sample, which is the default language of Amazon. And essentially what that lets you do is that once you deploy it, Amplify kind of goes away if you want it to, and you're just left with the raw AWS resources that you needed in the first place. Whereas with Netlify and Vercel, you do have a startup that's in between, and you can't really easily port between that and the underlying layer, if like eject to the underlying layer if you needed to. There's one other startup that is doing this ejectable scaffolding, which is begin.com. And so they're really interesting experiments, because it's this idea of like, how much do developers actually care about the underlying abstraction, or if you just lock everything down. So the argument of Netlify and Vercel is that if you lock everything down and you don't let people escape to the underlying layer, then you're able to provide a much better user experience, because they don't have that many things to configure, and there's not so many options. Whereas Amplify, if you look at the CLI, there's a ton of different options, and there's a learning curve to that. So it's trade-offs all the way. There's like a law of leaky abstractions, like basically all abstractions leak, and I think it matters what your approach to leaking is. Like eventually it's going to leak. Either you let people know upfront, or you push it to later when they're going to find out, at some point in time. But I don't think it's like a hard rule. I think there's space in the market for both of these kinds of solutions. But yeah, I do have a lot of thoughts on like the second layer cloud, because ultimately, how do you ever, like, let's say there are like 3 big clouds. There's more than 3, but like, Amazon, Google, Microsoft. How do you make the 4th big cloud, or how do you make like the competitor cloud? I think, which is what render.com and some of the other and Vercel and Netlify, that's the ultimate end game, which is you build the second layer cloud, you get all the developers on them, and then you move off of AWS. You build your own, you buy your own machines and data centers, and you build the 4th or 5th independent cloud that completely blows away the sort of legacy AWS-ness, which nobody loves, right? Nobody goes in, wakes up one day and go like, I really aspire to grow up to be an EC2, wizard. So I think the end game is people want to build the next independent cloud. So maybe that's one way to do it. But for as far as AWS Amplify goes, it's just a tool to use AWS easier.
And then my second point to it is Netlify and Vercel have really good abilities to onboard certain. They have really good abilities to onboard certain sections instantly. So you never have to use Netlify or Vercel from the start. You can obviously transition to them later. Is Amplify kind of like something you need to use from the start, or you can pick up later when DigitalOcean is no longer good enough for you? Or
could you repeat? I don't understand the premise of the question. So Netlify lets you onboard partially.
So, yes.
So can you migrate into Amplify? Can you migrate an existing project into Amplify is what he's wondering.
Yes.
Define migrate.
Just lift and shift with no work whatsoever.
Move from other services to the AWS alternative.
You're saying you can do that for Netlify? That's your standard?
Yeah, I'm saying you can do in the certain scenarios of it's just a front end that needs to be hosted somewhere. Netlify does that,
I'd say Amplify's capability is a superset of what those two offer. So that's a yes. But then my definition is very different, which is like when you say lift and shift, when you say migrate, I'm thinking like a full stack, non-Jam stack, right? Like it could be Rails, it could be Laravel, whatever, and that might take a lot more effort. But with enough elbow grease, you can migrate anything. So that's why I asked you to define migrating.
No, yes. Because, for example, and this is where Redwood is kind of going to a certain extent, they started with, this is going to be ran on serverless functions, to, if you kind of want very, very good performance, you need to host something, you need to get a node runner of some sort. And I found that serverless wasn't quite cutting it. So then I had to, learn PM2, boot it up on PM2, host an Ubuntu system. And every time you do them extra steps, you're adding an extra step of complexity.
Yeah.
And then it's this thing that we say, oh, it can be hosted anywhere. Cool. But hosting it anywhere is still a complex challenge, because how many steps does it include to host it anywhere?
Yeah, I mean that's why I like this idea of containers as like the deployment unit, because everyone can speak containers, and then all you got to do is fit your app into the container, and then it's understood by everyone. So there are a lot. Basically, like all the Jamstack providers are essentially creating their own configuration system. I'd be nice if like we all got together, sat down in a room and just like decided on one format. That's what Link, Glenn Mattern from Link, and which just got acquired by Cloudflare. So they're trying to do the front end application bundle is what he calls it.
Yeah, Fab. I first learned about Fab from Peter, actually, the Redwood developer.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting idea, with the only problem that it's so focused on Cloudflare workers that nobody else can adopt it. So that's why you don't see, like, for a spec to work, it needs to have adoption, and this has no adoption apart from Cloudflare. And now Cloudflare has acquired it, so there's even less incentive to make it work. Ultimately, what we got to do is like have this idea of containers for front end developers, and so it maybe the spirit of Fab will live on. But I think for backend services, for serverless, I really like this idea that we use Docker containers, like just like everyone else. Yeah, I mean, so that's something that Amplify released recently, which is this idea of serving containers as in a similar deployment workflow as serverless functions, and I really like it. I think it's something that I would explore for Redwood, given what you just said, Christopher.
Yeah, I think
totally. We've had Fargate was the first one that Peter was kind of looking at in terms of getting Redwood on like a containerization type thing. And I'm kind of curious about this because it sounds like Amplify is set up in a way where there are certain opinionated stacks already built into it, but obviously they want to give you flexibility. So do you think of a canonical Amplify stack, or is that just kind of like, does that not jive to you with what you think of as Amplify? Do you think there is an opinionated Amplify stack, or do you think that there is actually, you can have it be configured just as well to work serverless or say with containers?
The answer is somewhere in between. So Amplify is very opinionated that you should use AWS. If you're not looking to use AWS, you should use something else. And then within AWS, Amplify is pretty opinionated that you should use the sort of serverless versions of whatever is available within all of AWS's offerings. So it's kind of like best of Amplify's of AWS's serverless offerings. So even the Fargate, which is the serverless containers things, is marketed as part of like the whole serverless offering, which is kind of blending this idea of like what serverless even is, because like why should your function terminate within 5 minutes or 15 minutes? Why can't it go for 5 hours or 5 days or 500 days? There's cost issues and all that, but theoretically there should not be any when your infrastructure starts to leak into implementation detail into your code, and you're trying to code around it, that's when there's an opportunity to improve the infrastructure so that developers can express what they want, and the infrastructure figures it out. And so I think that's the ultimate goal for Amplify. And that's my answer for the opinionatedness. Like people do think that serverless seems to be the deployment model that people enjoy. It's not perfect, but it is improving every single year.
It's very cool. Yeah.
My one comment with containers is, do you think the struggle with it is the creating of the containers? Because every time I've used Docker, I found it very easy to pull containers through Compose, but actually creating containers and understanding that side of the ecosystem, I found really hard at the beginning to understand.
Yeah. Well, Dockerizing is like, there are a lot of tutorials on that. The assertion is like, what else are you going to do? So what is the alternative to Dockerizing? So like, just because there is a learning curve, like at least it's a standardized learning curve compared to a bunch of custom instructions that you have to learn every single time you approach a new project. So I don't know what the alternative is.
Could it be done for you through one command as Dockerize this? Well, from like a framework perspective.
Sure, maybe someone could build it. I'm not smart enough to have explored that yet, but yeah, if it doesn't exist, why doesn't it exist?
Exactly.
Get kicking, Chris.
It's one of those things where like probably learning the thing is easier than like coding some generalized tool that abstracts it away for everyone. I definitely think I'm on that side of the bucket because like, you know, yes, it took me some time to learn it, but it wasn't that hard.
Yeah, solving something for everyone instead of yourself, I think will always
Yeah.
be harder in all situations.
Yeah. But I mean, that said, you know, never say never, and people come along all the time and surprise us with their you know, persistence, and I think someone just has to feel the pain enough, and maybe someone that people haven't feel the pain. Like Netlify, I don't know if you've seen like Netlify's Docker image. It's essentially this giant Docker file that's just built up over like 6 years of existence, and it's essentially like the Docker file for all Netlify users. So
Is that on the Docker repo?
it's just search like GitHub/Netlify/build image, and it shows up there.
That is really interesting. I would be interested in checking that out.
Yeah, because you can build it locally. Like you could host the Docker yourself.
Yeah, it's a way to debug.
No, yeah, it's just on
locally.
GitHub. That's cool.
Yeah, it's also on Docker Hub too. Yeah, and there's some blog posts about that. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where like you're just kind of sweeping the complexity under the rug. You're never really going to reduce it, and so you know either the startup solves it for you, or someone else comes along and solves it in like an open way. But that is often a bit harder because by definition they are not going to be making any money from it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Another thing I would like to talk about is a project I think you've put a decent amount of work into, which is the DataStore. Can you say what the AWS DataStore is?
Ooh, yes. Okay. All right. This is great because I want to know what the Redwood perspective is. The DataStore is a local replica of your remote database. For us, it's DynamoDB. And so it's an on-device local replica. So in other words, like this helps you do sort of offline CRUD. It helps you make offline first apps. And as a nice side effect, it also eliminates any need for optimistic mutations, like optimistic updates, because you're just directly coding it. And it helps you also sync live. Like if anyone else connecting to the same app makes updates, your client automatically receives it because it's like a publish and subscribe model. So it really inverts a bunch of things that we take for granted in today's apps, which is very much like request response, and then like all the state is kind of held in like local state or the component state or whatever, or your Redux store, and the developer is responsible for writing all the syncing code and the invalidation code. What if we centralize all of that into a data store with very well understood syncing and conflict resolution and offline handling semantics that that we could just use and code against? That actually reduces a lot of code because you don't have to code for like retries and failures and all of that. And optimistic updates. And it produces a much better user experience because the app just feels a lot faster, which is really great. So the people who've been around the block in JS land will compare this to mini Mongo from the Meteor ecosystem. And I would say that's basically exactly what it is, except that it's the AWS version, and it's attached to DynamoDB, which is a very, very scalable database. Yeah, so I mean, I like it a lot. Obviously, there is one trade-off, which is the weight, the JavaScript bundle weight. So you do have to take care to code split it and only use it where it makes sense. But for the weight that you use, it's like 500 KB. It's not bad. Like it's a local on-device data store for your app. So if you need anything that is like offline first, and you want a very snappy user experience, I really like it.
Yeah, this is super interesting. And I wish we had Dom here because Dom talked about this on his episode, episode 7, shipping web applications, how he wants to create what he calls a local first application. And it's exactly what you just described, the type of thing he's looking for. It sounds like is DataStore. And it sounds like the way we're managing this is with Apollo's cache. I'm not sure how similar those things are, but at least that seems to be the tool we're using to kind of like try and approximate the ability to do that. So I am not deep enough into the Redwood code base to know about this, but I know it is a pain point that people are looking at in Redwood.
It's so I have some familiarity with it, and I'd say Apollo's cache is still too manual. You still have to write your own optimistic updates, and you still have to decide what the invalidation and if there's any conflicts, you have to decide that, and you have to decide retries and all that as well. Yeah, like we should just like agree on what this behavior is and have just some toggles of settings of like, oh, use this setting for this kind of use case and use this other setting for this other kind of use case. Obviously you can drop it down if you want to, but most people are not going to have to bother. Yeah, and I think I really like the fact that it also just like does the live syncing with other devices, so you can do collaborative editing just right out of the box. Try doing that with Apollo Cache. I don't know where you get started. And I think so. Here's like the really big brain thesis. I haven't blogged about this, but this is like a preview of a blog post. What we're doing here is abstracting over REST. We basically just realize that REST is not good enough for the developer experience. Like the amount of state management and like code needed to deal with REST on the client side and on the server side is unnecessary. And so that's what GraphQL is a layer on top of REST. That's what React Server Components is, essentially a new protocol that serializes React components down the wire. But it's another layer on top of REST because we don't want to deal with all this crap. We just want to, and that's what also Amplify DataStore and Meteor's mini Mongo is also another form of another way to get to bypass REST, because you have your local data store, you interact with that data store and you do all your updates with it, and the data store just syncs with its remote counterpart and just handles all that syncing, and you're not responsible for any of that code, and that's really great. So I mean that's my core insight. I think that we spend a lot of time doing state management and data fetching and retries, and maybe what if we did not have to do any of that? And that's a wild simplification of how front-end apps are made today, I think.
I love that. I was having this argument on Twitter with Dan Shapiro the other day. He was like, he couldn't explain like what's wrong with REST APIs. And I was just like, what's wrong with, like, really? Like you can't find any problems whatsoever. Like no challenges whatsoever for you. All right, cool, dude. You need to start teaching me.
They're not wrong, because like ultimately we're still going to probably use them under hood, or we could use WebSockets. It just doesn't matter. It's like the wrong level of abstraction for app developers, I think.
It's interesting you said about clients and Apollo, because in the latest Redwood update, Apollo is actually optional now as the default client. Nobody's took the unbeaten path yet and replaced Apollo, but I'm looking at it in my startup and look to convert to React Query, part of the TAN stack, and we'll see how that goes.
Fun fact, I coined the TAN stack too.
There we go.
That's so funny. I remember when I first saw that, because I use the stack and the full stack. Before I was doing the full stack Jamstack podcast with Chris, I had a newsletter called Minimum Viable Stack, and I was like, dude just named a stack after himself. Next level. That's happy to hear that you're the one who coined that. That's funny.
I love how it is called the TAN stack, even though it's just 3 sections right now. It's not the full stack yet, just 3 sections of it.
Yeah, no, but I mean, Tanner's a good friend, and yeah, he's prolific. I don't know how he does it, because he has a day job too. He doesn't do this full time. But yeah, React Query is really great. It solves the data fetching problem in React. I just do think that it probably should exist a little bit higher in abstraction, with essentially like your schema should also be on your local device, and if there's an authorization model together with your database, that's even better. And that's something that Amplify definitely really invests in, because I think often like access control should also come with your data. So yeah, it takes a lot of integration to get that right. And so I think that's something that is probably a comparative advantage of Amplify compared to, piecing together your own tools, because, you're going to have to code that yourself if you want all that.
Exactly. It's
very cool.
It's a really interesting time for
I want to be
everything
conscious of
that's
your
happening right
time
now.
here. So do you have any last questions, Chris, before we close it out here?
Do you still believe in the third age of web?
Even more
Third
now.
age of JavaScript. Third age of
Yeah,
JavaScript.
the third age of JavaScript. So for those listening, it's this thesis that every 10 years there's like a changing of the guard in JavaScript. The first 10 years were kind of about building out the language. The second 10 years was about building out the tooling and the infrastructure. That's the 10 years that just concluded from 2009 to 2019. 2009 was the same year was that Node, NPM, and ES5 were born in that same year. And pretty much like the past 10 years were about sort of realizing the consequences of that. And so I think now the next 10 years is about consolidating those levels of tooling. Why do we need to wire together ESLint and Prettier and Babel and Webpack and what have you? Why is that not all one tool? Why are we still building JavaScript dev tools in JavaScript when it's proven that ESBuild is 100 times faster than Webpack? So there's all these questions that arise, and we can talk about Svelte versus React as well. But yeah, there's all these questions that are kind of legacy assumptions, and I think one of the big drivers is the death of IE 11, which is starting in slow decline, and yeah, it will be completely gone by 2030. So that gives us a lot of opportunities for a new generation of tooling that doesn't have legacy assumptions and collapses together a bunch of tooling that has become industry standard. Yeah, I think that it's a lot of innovation and a lot of opportunities for open source developers if they want to, but also it's going to be a little bit tiring in terms of like the churn of the ecosystem. But it's nothing new for JavaScript developers, and if anything, we've shown that we're very resilient to changes in our tooling.
Yeah, I think part of this churn is because there's such a ahistorical bent in web development. Like web developers aren't taught older tools, which like makes sense because like you really shouldn't, but you need to know the context, which is why I love the blogging you do and the historical context you put into your writing. And so we'll definitely link to that in the show notes. I think most listeners probably already know this. Why don't you let them know kind of where people can find you online, where the best place is to read your stuff and get in contact with you?
Sure. I'm active on Twitter at Swyx, and then my blog is at swyx.io.
Very cool, man. Thank you so much for being here. I got like so much respect for the work you do, and the stuff that you're kind of spinning around is just like, it's fun, it's cool stuff. And like, I love how much you get out and communicate these things, it really resonates with kind of my values. So thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you. And thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
All right, cool.
That's it.
Okay. Awesome, man.
Sure.
That was super fun.
Yeah,
this is one of those things like I could talk to you for freaking hours about this stuff. Like so many things, so many rabbit holes, so many times I did not jump into a rabbit hole because I was like, we gotta stay on track. We got important things to talk about here.
Yeah, I mean, but it's good. It's good to keep it to an hour, especially for like the listener experience,
Yeah,